admissions counselor with Salve Regina University, located in the beautiful ocean state of Rhode Island. And with me today, we have two other presenters. So Grace, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace, and I'm a regional admissions counselor for Central Washington University, and I work with students from the King County, Pierce County area. Roosevelt?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. Like Grace said, my name is Roosevelt Mendez. I'm with the University of Idaho. I'm the Assistant Director for Admissions and work with our students in Western Washington. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, so we are part of a group of admissions counselors. Our group is called the Association for Regional Representatives of Oregon and Washington. And basically, we work for institutions that pay to have regional admissions counselors, folks that are based, right in your community or come to your community much of the time. They're in your time zone. They know your high school, because our colleges have made this investment in us being out here and getting to know students and families. We want to be a resource for all of you. We take the counselor part of our job title, admissions counselor, very seriously. And so today we're talking about financial aid basics. We're going to go over the financial aid process. I was just muted there. Sorry about that. We're going to go over the financial aid process, and we're going to spend about a half hour to 40 minutes doing that, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. If you have any questions at all at any point, feel free to type them into the chat. We may not see them right in the moment, but we'll be certain to get to those at the end of the presentation. So we're going to go over what is financial aid first. So financial aid is simply money to help pay for college, career, school, or so forth. But really, it's often a combination of things. It can be a combination of money that you do not have to pay back in the form of grants, scholarships, money that you work for, like work study, money that you do have to pay back with interest, like loans. Your tuition can be discounted. You can bring in outside scholarships. We're going to really tackle all of those types of aid in a little while. So just know that financial aid is kind of this bucket of ways to help reduce the cost of college and make college more affordable and realistic for you in the next years. And a lot of the time, students will come up to us at a college fair and they'll say, how much is your tuition, or how much do you cost? And sometimes they'll come up to me and say, oh, like, what's your out-of-state rate versus your in-state rate, and that kind of thing. And so I, of course, work for a private institution. So private colleges, have one tuition rate. There is not an in-state versus out-of-state. Public colleges are going to have different costs of tuition, but tuition is not the only thing that you have to think about when thinking about that total cost of college. There's tuition, there's the cost of living and eating on campus, your room and board. There's additional expenses that you have to estimate. So you add all of those things up, but then you have a financial aid package, and that will help to reduce those costs. And at the end of the day, it's all about that net cost, or what are you actually going to pay for one full year of college? And we'll kind of go into a lot of those details next in the presentation. But now I'll turn it over to Roosevelt to go over financial aid and forms.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So we're going to go over financial aid forms. And basically what we're going to do here is we're going to try to highlight some of the forms that you're going to be needing in order to fill out the financial aid. I know sometimes it can seem so cumbersome with all the forms you have to have and the information, but we're going to try to break it down super easy for you. And then hopefully we can light some things up that you may not know. So let's go ahead into the next slide. So the first thing is, let's just talk about the application itself. So where does the application come from? So the free application for federal student aid, or as many people know it, the FAFSA, is the main one that a lot of students know about. That's the one that opens October 1 of every year. A lot of students have to, or every student has to fill one of these out every year if they want to continue to get some of the aid that Nick mentioned, whether that be Pell Grant money, student loans, Parent Plus loans, anything like that. We have to have a financial aid application on file. So the FAFSA is the one that you would want to fill out. Now, there is other types of financial aid forms. We also have the WASFA, which is the Washington Act for State Financial Aid. There's also one for Oregon. And so these forms help out with a little bit of a different field. So they still look for that federal aid, but it's about if you're not eligible for federal aid due to immigration status. It does only apply to schools that are in Washington and Oregon, but it does help students find additional financial aid that's outside of the federal aid that's out there. So look at both of those applications. You're going to become best friends with FAFSA as you continue on through your college career. And if you're a counselor, you know it very well. And so I know sometimes it can seem like a daunting task, but FAFSA definitely helps students find the aid that they need in order to move forward. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about those forms individually. So the first thing that you're going to need to do to fill out a FAFSA application is have your Social Security number handy or your federal tax ID number. So this is what you're going to do to create your FSA ID. So you're going to need this number. Once you create that FSA ID, it's going to be much easier for you to log into your financial aid application. What it does is that it stores information such as first, last name, address, that type of thing. So when you do have to log in to fill it out each time, it's not going to be as much information as you did the first time. So you definitely need one of those two numbers in order to create an FSID to fill out the application. You're going to need federal income tax information. It could be a W-2, it could be your 1040A form, what you filed, whatever your filing status was. You're going to need that form in order to fill it out. The good thing is that the financial aid application now has the data retrieval tool, which is a huge thing. It allows you to pull that information directly from the IRS. It can be finicky, so you definitely want to make sure that you put in the information exactly like it was on your tax forms in order for it to pull that information. In case that it's not eligible to pull, sometimes it's not working properly, you can still put the information in manually by using your tax return form or your W-2 form. You can fill in those spots and it's very easy to read on the application. It has a number, it says go to this line, this is what the number that you'll need to put in. So if you have your tax forms, it's going to make this so much easier for you when you're trying to fill that out. And the third thing that you may need are bank statements and records of investments if possible. This isn't a requirement, but sometimes on the financial aid application, it's going to ask you for that information. So having it handy in order to fill out the application is best. Some of that information, once you get through the application, you get through the questions, you may find that you don't need it, but it's always good to have those forms just in case they ask you questions. And then that way you can put it in. I always tell students, carve out at least 30 to 45 minutes with this information, with the parent or the guardian that's going to be with you, have it handy, and that makes it the easiest and quickest way to fill out this information from the forms that you're going to need. Okay. So now I'm going to hand it over to Grace, who's going to kick us off on breaking down the offer letter.
Thanks, Roosevelt. So hi again, everyone. My name is Grace, and this section, we're just going to walk you through not only an example letter, but kind of talk about the different buzzwords that you'll see a lot when you view a letter, just generally coming from different colleges and different institutions. Something to note really quickly, though, is that most financial aid offers from every school is not going to look the same. Every school kind of formats it a little differently. So learning these words and understanding where you need to kind of pay attention to this and kind of get a better sense of like, okay, what is my actual net cost is really, really important. So this is kind of the example formula that we use, whether at a school or as a family, to kind of see what your net cost is or what your actual cost will be when you're going to a school. So in general, the equation is there is going to be a total cost of attendance for a school. So this is actually what your school will send to you if they think, hey, this is how much we think we're going to charge this next year. That includes not only tuition, which is to be a full-time student there, but as well as living on campus, eating, which is board, that dining meal, any extra fees like student fees. And then most schools also include an estimated expenses. So this is stuff that you're not actually billed for, but stuff that you should carve out some room and budget for, because you probably will have to eventually pay for these things down the line, whether that's transportation. So if you have to drive to your school, or if you're going to school out of state and thinking about those flight costs, thinking about decorating your room, right? Or if you want to eat out rather than using your meal plan, things like that. So that's what we call a cost of attendance, or a COA. You then will want to subtract your expected family contribution, or your EFC. This is something you'll hear about a lot when you're looking at the FAFSA or the WASFA or the ORSA, one of those, whatever you're eligible for. This is a number that is determined by the application. So this number is based on what information you put in your financial aid application, and it can range from $0 to $999,999, right? This is just kind of a gauge that they use, they meaning the federal government or the state government, as well as different institutions use to kind of see what your eligibility is based on need. And then we subtract this number from the institution's cost of attendance. After we do that, that's how we see what your financial gap is, or what we kind of need to fill and what you're eligible for. So once you get that financial gap number, we'll actually subtract the institutional financial aid. So this is, again, kind of what Nick was talking about in the beginning when talking about a financial aid package, anything from grants, scholarships, loans, right? All these things based, again, on need and based on the financial aid application that you fill out. So you'll want to subtract that from the financial gap, and that's how you get a net cost, or how much you're going to pay for this next year. Really important to know on the financial aid package, again, it's need-based. So it's really based on the numbers that you're putting into your financial aid, but then also having that talk about loans, as well as looking at outside scholarships too. Next slide. It's also great to note that within Aero, the group that we're a part of and the group that's hosting this presentation, a lot of the schools here, whether they're from out of state or even in state, depending on from where you're from and tuning in from, a lot of the schools offer a scholarship called the WUI Scholarship, or we call it, the full name is the Western Undergraduate Exchange. So the WUI Scholarship is a great scholarship that you can earn with various institutions if you're based out of one of the Western states of the United States, which you'll see on the map, which hoping if you're tuning in, you are from one of those states. But this allows you to participate in a discounted tuition rate. So each school kind of offers different amounts for this, but essentially you're paying close to almost in-state tuition when you get this scholarship. So you're not quite paying that out-of-state tuition rate, but for example, at Central, we charge about 150% of tuition. So students in the state of Washington, who would generally pay about $8,000, are $8,000 for in-state tuition. But if you live out of state, let's say you live in Oregon and you want to come to Central, usually out-of-state students have to pay roughly $20-something thousand for out-of-state tuition. But if you get the WUI scholarship, then you only have to pay $12,000. So again, close to that in-state rate. So make sure that when you're looking at public schools, so public schools within the Western area, that you ask them if they have a WUI scholarship. I know University of Idaho with Roosevelt does too. Next slide.
Yeah, so Roosevelt, before we talk about the award letter, did you want to give us a few more details about these kinds of financial aid that could make up the package, and kind of telling us a little bit more about, like, I know sometimes students ask, like, what's a student scholarship and a grant, and those things. So
yeah, absolutely. So breaking down the types of award is really important, because as Nick said, there is different types of award that could mean either paying that money back, not paying that back. And so it's really good to understand where that money is coming from. So the first thing is that money that is given to you that you do not have to pay back, we like to freely call it free money, right? There is no free money necessarily, but this is free money to you from the federal government. And that is going to be your Pell Grant. So Pell Grant is based completely on need, which is why when Grace was breaking down the expected family contribution and what your need was going to be, it's really important to understand that, because this is how we fill it. We fill it with Pell Grant money first. So we look to see if you're eligible for Pell Grant. That's determined by your EFC. If not, we can also look at scholarships. So scholarship is also money that you don't have to pay back. You earn scholarships either by merit, so that's totally based on your academics. You can earn scholarships based on extracurricular activities. So that could be in involvement, that could be involved in your community, whatever that may look like. Third-party scholarships are something that the example that I like to use is like Coca-Cola gives out this big scholarship to a student every year, maybe 2 or 3 students every year. Those are third-party scholarships. That's also free money that you don't have to pay back. So all of that is going to fall into the category of earned. This is money that you've earned. You don't have to pay that back. But financial aid also encompasses loans. And I think a lot of people think of it very separately. They think, oh, I'm never going to be eligible for financial aid because it only encompasses Pell Grant. Well, that's not necessarily true. So it's not true. We also encompass loans in that. So if you look at your financial aid application, if you're not eligible for Pell Grant, we can't fill it because you don't show that much need, then we'll offer loans. And the loans that come from the federal government, there's 2 different types, and that's your subsidized and your unsubsidized loans. So your subsidized loans are loans that are not going to accrue interest while you're in school. They give you a grace while you're in school. You don't have to accrue interest. And then 6 months after, which is that grace period before you have to start paying the money back, is when the interest will come. And then you have your unsubsidized loan. These loans are going to accrue interest just like any other loan would work, like from a bank or any outside entity. It's going to accrue that interest while you're in school. The good thing is that sometimes the federal government loans interest rates are going to be much lower than interest rates that you find at your bank or whatever, your credit union, wherever you're looking at getting a loan. A lot of the times the federal government loans interest rates are going to be much lower than that. So they do change every year. The federal government sets those standards out before the year starts. And so most of the time you can find that interest rate loan on the FAFSA website. You can also talk to your financial aid office once you've chosen an institution, and they should be able to give you the rate of that loan. Another loan that falls under that is the Parent Plus loan. Some institutions use it, some don't, but it's good to just be aware of what that is. And so a Parent Plus loan is also by eligibility. So your parents would have to apply separately for this loan with the institution. It's just another way of being able to try to fill that need, is sometimes they'll offer you a Parent Plus loan. Always remember that you're not obligated to take this money. I think a lot of students think, oh, they offered me these loans, so I got to say yes. You're not obligated to take the loan money. So just remember that as you're filling out financial aid and you're getting those offers in, talk to your financial aid office about how much you need. If they offer you a $5,000 loan, but you only need $2,000 to cover the rest of it, then talk to your financial aid office about what options you have. Maybe you could accept one loan, but not the other. And so every school is going to be different. So you just want to make sure you're talking to your institution and being open with them about those loans and about wanting to keep that debt down as much as possible. And so those are going to be your types of aid. And the last one is going to be your work study. So work study is also encompassed in the financial aid application. That work study is going to be, just to be able to explain, it's like a job having on campus. You're going to go to a normal job. You're going to work the hours that they give you. You'll have a supervisor, but the money is coming from the federal government as opposed to the institutions. You're not where the money, the paycheck that you get is going to come directly from the government as opposed to getting a paycheck from the institution that you're working at. And so that's a work study program. And there's most every school is going to have one, and those jobs are really good to look at because they're flexible with schedules. They're also based on need, so just make sure on the financial aid application there is a question that asks, would you like to be considered for work study? And if you don't really know for sure, then just put yes, and just put yes, I'd like to be considered. You can always decline it. You don't have to go to the interview, but it's always good to have that in your back pocket just in case you're needing that extra job, and then you can work a certain amount of hours and it'll also pay you that way. So just make sure you keep that on your radar. I think a lot of students are scared to say yes because then they think they're committed to being on a work study job. That's not true. If you say yes, then that just means your financial aid office is going to ping you whenever it's time to do financial or work study jobs. They'll send you out a notice saying, hey, a couple of jobs out here. If you're interested, you're eligible. So please apply. So just make sure that you're aware of that question on the application. So I think that's it, Nick, if you want to move on to Grace.
Awesome. Well, I think I was about to go through a sample letter for all of you all. So now that you have a kind of a sense of the formula and how this breakdown works, remember we have that total cost of attendance, we subtract your family's EFC, we get that financial gap, we close that gap with a financial aid package, and we kind of have that bottom line cost. So now just want to show you a sample letter from my institution. So this is actually what a real student would have paid to go to Salve. So our letter, and every letter is going to look a little different. Unfortunately, there's not one standard way that all institutions around the country report on these things. I think most schools try to kind of generally break them into similar categories, but there are going to be some differences in how letters compare. And that's a pro tip right there. You might want to ask your guidance counselor about does the school have some kind of financial aid calculator or template? So you can plug in these numbers from different packages and have sort of like a standardized way of comparing your financial aid packages. But for Salve, we have our total cost of attendance. So we have those direct costs. So tuition and fees, which are going to be higher than a public institution because we are a private school. So that total for 1 year last year was $44,200. Then we add in room and board, so what it costs to live and eat on campus, and that brings a total billed cost of $60,200. And I know for some students, $60,200 sounds like a lot, right? That might sound like, oh my gosh, how could I ever pay that for 1 year of college? But you'll see in a minute how that number goes way down for this student. So we also estimate those indirect costs. So we have a budget for what the typical student might spend on books and supplies. And that's actually a pretty high number. I think that's like if you bought all brand new books and that kind of stuff, you can certainly find ways to save money by getting used books or renting your textbooks. Personal expenses. So Grace kind of mentioned, some of those like transportation costs or decorating your room or those kinds of things. If there's any fees for your loans, all of those things come up. We have this total indirect cost that you want to budget for as well. So that brings Salve's total cost of attendance to a little bit above $65,000. So then we have this financial assistance. And so we have scholarships and grants. So this is, that gift aid that does not need to be paid back. This student was eligible for $43,000, $43,500 in scholarships and grants. And on this next page, you can see how that breaks down for the students. So they have our merit scholarship that, students don't have to do anything to apply for. They're automatically evaluated for those, but that's going to vary from college to college. Some colleges don't have merit scholarships, some do, some have certain requirements, sometimes you have to apply for them. So it's going to vary from school to school, and you want to ask your admissions counselor about that. Then we have our Ochre Scholarship, which is a special scholarship that students do apply for, and this student applied for that scholarship. And she received additional money from that. And then this also includes her federal unsubsidized direct loan. And so you take that total cost, you subtract this financial assistance, and at the end of the day, if the student decided to accept her loans, she would be paying $11,200 a year, down from $65,000 a year. So this is just one student. And of course, these packages are going to vary from student to student. But I hope your takeaway from this is, don't focus so much on the institution's total cost of attendance. That's just one data point. You want to know what it's actually going to cost your family to go there for 1 year. All colleges are required to have something called a net price calculator. So you can go on Google, you can type that in. It'll ask you questions similar to what the FAFSA will ask, like how much money does your family have in the bank and what are your grades and things like that. And, it'll basically say, this is what 1 full year will cost. And that'll give you a better idea of is this institution, within the realm of affordability. It's also nice to do this net price calculator for different kinds of colleges. Do it for a public in-state, do it for a WUI out of state, maybe do it for a private college, so that you can start having a conversation with your family around, what do we want to pay for college? How much money would we want to take out in loans? And what are we comfortable paying? And what are these different calculators coming out to? So that you feel a little bit more informed going into the process in your senior year. But finally, we'll turn it over to Grace for some final tips.
Awesome. So lots of information that we just went through in a really short time, but if you take anything away, hopefully these last few tips will help you as you start their journey of thinking about applying for financial aid and receiving financial aid from various institutions. Next slide. Some of the first tips I recommend to students in general is just to start early and prepare. That's probably one of the biggest things, because time is definitely on your side if you set yourself up for success, just like by being on top of everything. So Nick had mentioned, or Roosevelt had mentioned earlier, that financial aid applications tend to open on October 1st. And this applies for a lot of schools too, but the earlier you can apply and get those out to your various schools, the better. Some schools even have deadlines for financial aid. So you'll want to make sure that you stay on top of that, and you can prepare early just by, again, preparing those documents that Roosevelt had mentioned. There's even an option, I believe, if you're not a senior, maybe if you're a junior or sophomore, to kind of plug in those data points. Nick, feel free to jump in and talk about that if you want, but there are tools out there that can kind of help prepare you ahead of time. Something else to think about too is just making sure that you put your legal name on everything, and that includes not only financial aid, but as well as applying to colleges as well. Make sure that you put your name on your birth certificate, the same exact thing, because the information needs to match your application overall. Again, pay attention to deadlines. Every school has a different deadline. So make sure that you keep track of those and try to apply by those deadlines. But again, the earlier, the better. And then make sure you research. There are so many scholarships out there, and a lot of seniors tend to wait until the end of senior year before they start applying. And right when they're trying to make a decision and they're trying to get more money, but sometimes that might be a little too late. So something you can do even as a sophomore or junior is try to apply for those scholarships early if you're eligible for them. Make sure that you're talking to your college and career counselor, or maybe your high school counselor, to see if they know any local scholarships available to you. If you're a part of any community groups like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, anything like that, you're involved in your church, anything, try to see if they provide scholarships to seniors, because those will add up quickly. And it might be a $50 scholarship, a $100 scholarship. And that seems like nothing to you when you're looking at thousands, but trust me, the more you apply to, the better. And then, like Roosevelt said, there are a lot of national scholarships as well, like the Coca-Cola one is probably one of the most popular ones. Feel free to throw your name in the ring as well, but know that the smaller applicant pool it is, the better chance you have of getting one of those scholarships. And there are websites online where you can just try to essentially filter the scholarships that you're eligible for. I know College Board has that as well. So just make sure you do your proper research, but also be prepared. There are a lot of scams out there. So if you have to pay for anything, like pay for any scholarship application, probably not the one you want to fill out. It's probably a scam. So make sure that you're doing thorough research. Ask the adults, ask any college admission counselor if you have any questions about them and their authenticity. And then after you receive a financial aid award, make sure that you just follow up, because a lot of schools are left hanging sometimes, and just trying to get a sense of what money is eligible for their students. So make sure that you follow up and not only say yes and no to different parts of your application that you're accepting or declining, but make sure you go through next steps too. A lot of seniors, again, wait until right before college before they do this, but try to make sure that you go through like loan counseling if you're taking out any loans. If you and your family have any circumstances that the FAFSA or the WASFA or ORSA didn't really picture for your family and didn't incorporate, then make sure you reach out to schools, because some schools also have an appeal process as well, where you can talk about the special circumstances that make you eligible for more money, or, you know, talk about maybe any medical bills that came up the past previous years or anything like that. And the schools also have payment plans too. So it's not like you have to pay the bill right up front full. You can ask them about your options to pay over time. Again, just making sure that you contact your financial aid counselor as well as maybe your admission counselor to see what options there are for you at every stage and at every point, because it looks different for everybody. So make sure you ask a lot of questions. And finally, the biggest thing to know is that you will want to do this every single year you plan to go to college. So It is a very tedious process, I know, but every year you do it, it kind of gets easier. Every year. And even if you don't think that your family will need it for a year, you never know what the circumstances might turn out later on during the year. So make sure that you apply for financial aid every year while you're going to college. Next slide. And then just again, just regarding some of the outside scholarships, like I mentioned, make sure you ask your college counselor. The school might have a list of local scholarships or organizations that they know about. Ask a mentor or anybody within any of the organizations you're a part of. And then again, never pay money for an outside scholarship. Don't fall for those scams. And if you question it, send it to somebody and they can try to help you through it. Next slide. All right, just in terms of what's next, how you can get more information, Arrow is a great resource just in terms of making sure that you prepare for the transition of not only applying to colleges, but next steps and everything like that. So feel free to explore your options. We are saving the presentations on our website, so you're more than welcome to go back and rewatch some of these. You can also visit our Arrow directory where there's contact information for representatives from various schools if you need to contact anybody. And then of course, reach out if you do have any questions. We're happy to help and we're happy to chat as well. Next slide. All right, at this time, we're happy to take any questions you might have. We are ending a little early, but we're happy to take any questions you might have about financial aid. And then after this presentation, of course, please connect with an admissions office or specifically the financial aid office at various institutions you're interested in to ask your financial aid questions. But at this time, we're also happy to try to answer them. Feel free to just throw it in the chat.
And maybe to get us started, so I think Roosevelt, you already answered this question from the audience, but a student was asked, just wanted to clarify, so the FAFSA opens October 1st of your senior year. Any tips about, maybe preparing for the FAFSA? I know you covered this a little bit with what forms you would need, but any advice about, what students should be doing kind of around that time of their senior year?
Yeah, so for senior year, when you start looking at applying for FAFSA, it's not just having the forms ready, but it's having the time to actually sit down and finish the application. I used to work in financial aid. It feels like forever ago now, but it seems to be the same. And so when you wait last minute to do financial aid, some things can happen. And some things I like to make students aware of is that when you submit that financial aid application through the FAFSA website, that's not necessarily your last step. So don't think, oh, I submitted my FAFSA, I'm completely done. And this comes in with preparing early. If you apply early and then on your application, say there's a discrepancy or say the financial aid office tags you and says, hey, we're going to need some additional information about your household size or income or whatever it is that you may need, then you'll have enough time to get that paperwork in and still get your award in time. So if you wait last minute and then there's an issue, it's really hard for financial aid offices to turn that around super quickly because we're not just working with the institution, we're working with the federal government. And so a lot of it is dictated by how long it takes them to process and for them to release the money and those types of things. So don't think that submitting the FAFSA is the last step. I like to think of it in 3 steps. Submit your FAFSA, contact financial aid officer, and accept your award. So you have those 3 steps to do. Once you get done with that 3rd step and you've accepted your award and you've got it, then you can breathe a little bit more. But until you get to that space, just remember, contact your financial aid office early, and that means apply early.
So families, put that October 1 right in the calendar on the fridge, circle it, and keep that in mind for those seniors. We have another question. When do federal loans need to be paid back?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Roosevelt. Feel free to jump in as well. But it really depends on what loan you take out as well. Usually a lot of the loans have a 6-month grace period of post-graduation. So let's say you're graduating from college in 2026, summer of 2026. Usually you have about 6 months after you graduate from college before your payments have to start coming in. That's usually the required but keep in mind that some loans do accrue interest while you're in school, some don't. So my tip usually for students is that if you are taking out a loan that does accrue interest while you're in school, even though payments aren't required until after you graduate, maybe even try to throw like a couple bucks at it per month to keep the interest down, because you don't want a $2,000 loan looking like massive by the time you graduate in 4 years. If you can throw some coffee money at it, maybe 20 bucks at it a month, anything helps overall. But that's generally.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is not just graduation, but say you decide to take a year off and you drop below 6 credit hours, then that 6 month grace period starts then. So just be aware of that. You can always defer it. You can always say, oh, I'm just taking a year off. I'm going to come back to school. I'm going to, get above that 6 credit hours. But just be aware of that, because if you do drop below, then the 6 months kind of starts then, and then they'll probably be asking for payments. So just be aware of that as well.
Okay, so we have another question. How is the family contribution calculated in the formula? So I can try to take that, but please correct me, Roosevelt or Grace, if there's anything else that you would add. So when you fill out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, it's asking questions about the family's ability to pay for college, not just the student. So unless the student is truly independent from their parents in a legal sense, like they're not claimed by their parents on the taxes, the college is going to be looking at the family's ability to pay for college. So when you do the FAFSA, it'll ask questions about the family's assets, like how much money they have in the bank and the parents' income. It'll also ask questions about the students' assets and the students' income to come up with that amount, that expected family contribution, or the amount that, according to this government formula, that the family would be expected to pay. Again, it's not what colleges take that number, and they might use that full number, they might do something else with it. So it's not always what you're going to pay for college, but for colleges to kind of figure out, okay, does this family have a financial need and how big is that need? So, should we be giving them a pretty sizable financial aid package and using a lot of our resources? Or if the family does not have a high amount of need, maybe that package could be a little smaller. But Roosevelt or Grace, anything you would add about that, the family part of the payment?
No, I think you covered it.
I think another thing to keep in mind too is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Roosevelt, I think the maximum student federal loans is at 27,000 over the 4 years. I think it's you can take out a certain amount in your first year, then it changes in your second, third, and fourth year.
Yeah, so it changes by your status in college. So freshmen will be able to take out a certain amount of money. As a junior, they'll increase it. Sophomore, increase that as well. So it does increase per year, but as a freshman, you have a max. They change every year, but I think sub is around the 2,700. Unsubsidized, you can go up to 4,500, I believe. So it just depends on the maximum amount, but it does change based on the year that you're in.
Yeah, and so parents can take loans as well. They have the Parent Plus loans, which is also a federal loan and has better interest rates than private loans. And I think increasingly, what we're seeing is that it's not just students that are taking out loans, but parents are taking a share of that burden as well. And parents, especially for private colleges, probably are going to be taking out higher loans because they can take out more loans than their student. So not all the time, but there's a combination of what the student pays for college, what the family pays. I think a lot of the time the family will probably be paying a little bit more, but that's going to depend on the family situation. But all good questions to ask. Okay, so another question. I graduate in 2023. I can't do FAFSA until senior year, correct? Yes, correct. Okay, and then what if I also attend medical school after undergrad? When do the loans need to be paid?
Yeah, so if you go to grad school after you graduate from undergrad, so whether it's a grad program or medical school or law school, if you continue any type of schooling, you can defer your loans while you're in school.
Just make sure that you're filling out a form for that. If not, they will come and try to get your payment plan set up and that type of thing. So if you know you're going to be attending school within that 6 month period, even if it's post undergraduate, you definitely need to make sure that you fill out the form, submit it through the FAFSA website, studentloans.gov. Make sure you fill out the deferment form.
When can we start applying for scholarships?
I mean, I think we would all say early. You know, you want to make sure that you're meeting the deadline. So starting to check to see some scholarships are reoccurring. So, you know, some scholarships are going to happen every year. So being prepared to apply for those reoccurring scholarships. You may have some that pop up here and there, but making sure that you're reading deadlines, meeting every single deadline of your senior year. Most of the time to submit the application at senior year, but you can forecast that. You can look and see which ones do you want to apply to. You can start writing essays, getting those edited, looking at different types of scholarships. So the earlier that you can get it done, just as long as you're meeting the deadline applications, I would say. Nick or Grace, do you have anything to add?
Start now.
Yeah. And I just emphasize, you know, also talking to your college counselor. You know, I think a good rule of thumb when you're walking down the hallway is asking yourself, like, well, does my counselor know my first name? If they don't, you probably want to get on that even earlier on. At a lot of larger public schools, you know, you might not really be meeting or you might not be talking about college with your counselor until a little bit later in high school. But if you're a freshman or a sophomore watching this, you know, that's a good time to go into your college counseling office and just ask about local scholarships, things that you can start applying to a little bit earlier on while you have this time and you're not, you know, stressed with senior year and doing so much stuff. So Grace, before you were kind of touching a little bit on, you know, financial appeals and sort of that process, I think one question that sometimes or some students may have, especially this year, is, you know, if COVID impacted my family, what are some things I can do to, you know, help my case? You know, maybe to let financial aid be aware of that. You know, keeping in mind that the FAFSA is based on the family's past prior year taxes, so 2 tax seasons ago. And, you know, the difference between 2019 and 2020 might be pretty drastic for some families' financial situations. And that the formula maybe would have come out to a very different number just a year later. So, you know, what are some things families can do to kind of be proactive about any major changes they've had in their financial circumstances?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick. And that's a valid point, especially with financial aid. You do take your family's tax information from 2 seasons ago. So a lot can change within 2 seasons, but specifically in this past year with COVID, a lot has really changed for a lot of families. So the biggest thing to know is that you can reach out to various financial aid offices from different institutions that you're looking at and let them know, like, hey, I would like to appeal my financial aid. Usually what you'll want to have ready is either some type of document or of proof of whatever you're talking about, whether it's medical bills, whether it's, you know, my parent got laid off and had to be on unemployment for a bit. Just have documentation because proof is really important for that. And then make sure that you have something typed up already, kind of explaining it so that you can just either save it as a document or copy and paste it and send it to the different schools that you're looking at. That's probably what's going to help you the most. But again, just making sure that you contact the financial aid office early, because you don't want to reach out to them the day before school starts and hope that they'll get back to you in 24 hours with some money. You know, give them some time because they are working with every single student at the school, not only the incoming students, but the current students too.
I'm not seeing any further questions so far. Students, if you have any last questions, please feel free to type those in, but maybe we could all just kind of go through and give one last piece of advice for folks watching this webinar, whether you're earlier in the process or you're about to start applying for financial aid in senior year. What's, you know, maybe one last piece of advice you would give? Roosevelt, if you want to start us out.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said before, just remembering the three-step process: submitting your FAFSA, contacting your financial aid office, and then accepting your award. Don't forget that those, are all steps that you need to go through to make sure that you get financial aid. So my last tip would just be to make sure you follow those three, and make sure you get that application in early as possible in case there's any issues. You can work those out before school starts and you're not in a panic trying to get last minute financial aid stuff done.
I can go next. So I'll just say, I think a lot of what we're talking about is kind of centered around senior year. So I think for those younger students, I've already kind of touched on, getting to know your guidance counselor, trying to find some local scholarships you can apply to earlier on. I think another thing you can do, if you Google FAFSA forecaster, you can basically do like a sample FAFSA early. So it's not going to be as intense, but it'll just kind of help to give you an idea of what is this number coming out to. Again, it's not like down to the cent, and it's not a perfect figure, but it'll just give you a really rough idea of what does the government think my family should be able to pay for college, because your considerations might be kind of different. If the government feels that your family should pay little to nothing for college, then you might want to be looking at colleges that meet full demonstrated need, and most admissions counselors can tell you that. Opportunities to really have quite a bit of it paid. Maybe you're on the opposite side. Maybe your family is expected to pay quite a bit for college. You might want to look into colleges that offer merit scholarships, and can offer pretty sizable merit scholarships, so that even if your family doesn't have a huge financial need, you can still get those costs down with scholarships. They're often based on your grades, but at some colleges, like mine, for example, they're not always only based on academics. There's other forms of talent that those scholarships could go to as well. But Grace, any final advice from you?
Yeah, I would say make sure that you take your time and double check your work. It is very easy to slip up numbers on a financial aid application, and that can mess with the process in a lot of ways, whether it's you're putting in your social security number and accidentally misplace one number and it doesn't align with your actual social security number, and you don't hear back from a school for a while because they're like, I never received a FAFSA. Or it's really easy to slip an extra zero at the end of like the part where it says like, what's my parents' income? If you slip in an extra zero and you put 800,000 rather than 80,000, right? It's going to make you ineligible for financial aid in certain ways. So just make sure that you really take your time through it, double check all the work, the spelling, the numbers, everything. And that goes even when you receive a financial aid offer. Make sure that you double check everything, because like Nick mentioned earlier, and I had mentioned this earlier too, not every school will have the same format when it comes to financial aid. And while one school's financial aid might make it seem like you're getting a really good deal out of it, depending on the formatting, you could actually be receiving a better deal at a different school. So if finances is a huge part of your college decision, just make sure that you walk through it with somebody and actually look through your real net costs, and how much is expected to take out in loans and everything, because it's easy to kind of get misplaced by all of that. So make sure you double check your work everywhere.
Okay, well, if there's no final questions, I think we could probably start to wrap it up. Oh, I do see one final question that came in here. Is there a range of parents' earnings that start going against students? For example, 125,000 will pretty much remove the possibility of scholarships. So basically, the FAFSA is saying, what should your family be expected to pay for college? And then college offices use that number to say, should they get a large scholarship or not? So if you're a high income family, both parents are working and they're high earners, the FAFSA might say that you're expected to pay a pretty high amount for college. But that doesn't mean that you can't get scholarships. You probably won't qualify for grants that are based on that need. things like, Roosevelt mentioned the Pell Grant. There's also institutional grants, things like that. That's basically if your family has a demonstrated need. But scholarships often are more tied to like academics or talent or things like that. Not all colleges have merit scholarships. But if you are a family that do have more high earners, you probably want to apply to colleges where they do offer merit scholarships, so that your student may qualify for some of those that can help to get those costs down. Anything you guys would add about that?
I would say also just make sure you consider like WUI. It's a scholarship, it's given to any student as long, well, depending on the institution. For Idaho, it's any student is accepted. And so, there is so you want to be careful when we use the word grant. Grant usually does indicate by need. So you may not be eligible for grants, but like Nick said, that does not count you out for scholarships, which WUI is the tuition assistance. Scholarships are merit-based, third-party scholarships, COCO, the things that we talked about. That's not going to count you out of those based on income, because those are based on merit or based on extracurriculars. And so really, if you're looking to see what am I going to be eligible for, within just ask your question, what is that money coming from? Did I earn that money? Did I, make a 4.0, that's why I'm getting it? Or is it based on the FAFSA application? And so you just want to make that distinction, but it's not going to count you out of scholarships. So don't think that. Please apply for scholarships. It may count you out of some grants if that number is the exact number or the right number. Like Nick said, also we take into account household size. So you could have a huge income, but then your household size could be 8 people. And so that could that could bring down the amount of EFC, which means you could be eligible for grants. So there's just a lot of different factors that we look at in a financial aid application. So I would say fill it out anyways, and then see what happens after that.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point about, doing the FAFSA. I think sometimes families say, oh, well, we're not going to get money anyway, so we shouldn't do the FAFSA. But I think all of us would suggest do the FAFSA anyway, because your student, even if you are a quote unquote full pay family, where maybe the financial piece is not a huge part of the student's decision because you have the resources to fund, basically fully fund your student's education, you might still want to have your student take out a small loan and build credit, and learn how to have that responsibility of making those payments when they graduate. So I don't think you have anything to lose by doing the FAFSA, is what I would say. And a lot of the times, some schools will not let you have a merit scholarship if you don't do the FAFSA. I don't think that's always the case, but that could also be something to keep in mind too. All right, well, I think we can end it here, but if you have any further questions, we posted the link in the chat, but we'll post it again one more time now. Check out admissionsarrow.com. You can see other useful sessions like this about the college going process. You can also hear from individual institutions and find out a little bit more there, but we're so happy to work with you in the future. As I mentioned before, we either kind of live in your area or we travel to your area quite a bit. So we'd love to talk to you about our colleges. You can find our contact information up there. But thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.